And to add, I think this slide is really interesting to add to what you mentioned as Bitcoin being a very unique asset and maybe one of the only ones that has this kind of double nature a bit as a risk off and a risk on asset. And you can see that with the 7-day rolling correlations over this year so far. At the beginning of the year, we of course had more favorable market conditions, and here you can see that the correlation from Bitcoin to gold, which is in yellow, actually came down significantly, whereas its correlation with other equities like the S&P or tech equities had actually increased throughout this period of time. And on the flip side, recently, when we actually saw some market uncertainty, its correlation with gold picked up significantly, and it actually decoupled from risk on equities. So that's quite an impressive nature. And this is exactly why we think Bitcoin should be a part of anyone's portfolio. It's a truly unique asset, and it's the only one that shows these tendencies. And of course, I know this chart looks really noisy, and it actually is, but it shows also that Bitcoin doesn't have a strong correlation actually to any asset. And as a result, to add it to your portfolio, it's a true option to diversify your risk. Cool. That brings me to the next slide where we're actually going to make a prediction this time around. And Matt and I and the wider team here, we do think that Bitcoin is poised to potentially outperform both gold and equities in this quarter. The first thing that I'd like to note here is that we see this chart with a Bitcoin to gold performance, essentially showing the Bitcoin to gold ratio. And what we noticed is actually over time, one thing that you see is it consistently forms higher lows. And that's something that is a direct result of Bitcoin's kind of appreciation over a long period of time. But over here recently, we've actually seen the higher lows form significantly higher ladders, which is quite impressive. And we think that given that risk on sentiment is starting to return to markets and Bitcoin again benefits from this, whereas gold actually does not, we do think that Bitcoin will outperform. Of course, that's not to say that there won't be any uncertainty in markets. We've seen how choppy it has been in the first quarter. But again, Bitcoin, if uncertainty returns, does stand to benefit because some people, I believe, are slowly starting to see it really as this emerging store of value, which is again what we saw throughout Bitcoin's performance this month. Cool. The world never sleeps, especially the crypto world. And aside from price action, there's been a number of quite exciting and new developments in the crypto space. Of course, like always, I think Strategy kept announcing more Bitcoin acquisitions throughout the month. I think last week they added another $1.4 billion worth of Bitcoin to their treasury. And it just shows, it reinforces their position as the top corporate Bitcoin holder. But they're not the only ones, and there's going to be more coming. And we're seeing this with more strategy-esque acquisitions. And one of the ones that there's many of these already going around. We've seen Metaplanet continue to add to their stash as well. I think they now hold 400 million. But the most interesting one that we pointed out for this month is the launch of 21. It's funny, they're not actually related to 21 shares, but imitation is a great form of flattery, so great name. But aside from that, it's a really big development because it's essentially not, it's an acquisition, a BTC acquisition firm primarily, but they're actually backed by SoftBank, Tether, but also Cantor Fitzgerald. Sorry for the mispronunciation there. But Cantor Fitzgerald is actually led by Howard Lutnick, which is the US Secretary of Commerce. So this shows that this is quite a big development, and it's not just any other firm. Not only that, but they're actually going to launch with around 42K Bitcoin, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, would already make them the second largest corporate Bitcoin holders. So that's quite a big development here.